back on the 0 Hour. I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. And joining us once again for our labor and who knows what else report is our good friend Mike Out. Mike, as you know, is a great labor reporter, and he is also editor and publisher of the Payday Report. That's paydayreport.com, I think, right, Mike?
That's right.
And he's reporting to us from the streets of Pittsburgh. He is, live and in person. Well, you're not hearing this live, but we're hearing the street noise live in Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh. So first of all, Mike, welcome back to the program.
It's great to be back on the show, Richard. I'm right here in Squirrel Hill, which is the historic Jewish community here in Pittsburgh. Sorry about any background noise. We've been running around interviewing folks. It's actually quite interesting. We're just a few blocks from where the Tree of Life Synagogue massacre was here. So we're here in Squirrel Hill, which is, where the massacre was. I was there that day. An AR-15 was involved, like in Oviedo, like everywhere else. There's a lot of factors that lead to these shootings, but one factor is always the same. They got a gun.
Right.
I think both my experiences here, having been through a Jewish massacre here as a Jew and having covered the drug war in Brazil, where there were lots of guns, I think there's nothing more important than gun control for us as a movement. Anybody who's had to go through this pain, and for too long, we've seen a lot of unions not take any positions on gun control.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I was even talking with Matt Cunningham Cook, who was working over at PASNAP, which is Progressive Nurses Union. He was saying, I wouldn't recommend our union getting involved in this because our membership's not for it. Well, union leadership is about sometimes getting ahead of the membership, sometimes saying, hey, these, provoking, challenging the membership to take on new heights. And this weekend in Washington, D.C., there is one labor leader who has consistently taken on this issue, which is Randy Weingarten, who's president of the American Federation of Teachers. I remember interviewing Randy right after Sandy Hook, and Randy telling me that this is a tragedy, of how upset she was to see her members targeted like this.
Right.
And we've certainly seen that union, the teachers union, take a lot of targeting. We've seen other unions, UFCW, lost some members in grocery store shootings. We've seen bus drivers killed in these situations. And I think now we're starting to really see an opening on these issues in the labor movement, that this is something we have to address. But the full weight of the labor movement isn't behind it. You could obviously have unions have a lot of credibility with people that might be pro-gun voters go out and change employers' minds. I remember once Chris Townsend, who's the retired political action director of UE, United Electrical Workers, UE, pretty progressive union, said, if you think the boss is pro-gun control, take a gun to work and see what happens. They'll throw you off the premise really quick and fire you. These guys might fund right-wing politicians that use it as a shtick, but no corporation will allow guns. Look at what happened with Trump at CPAC, right? Trump was going to the big conservative convention, and guns were banned. They know this is a threat. They know this is an imminent threat. And I think we're at a turning point now in terms of gun control. I think the shooting in Texas opened up some eyes. And I think, the leadership we're starting to see from, this weekend, Randy Weingarten sponsoring a big rally in Washington, D.C. I think there's a lot to be said about Weingarten's role in this as the head of one of the largest teachers unions in the U.S., as well as the NEA, National Educators Associations. Those unions account for almost 25% of the membership in the U.S. To see these unions putting big resources behind something that's just not teachers union contract or, there's some semi-failure going by. To see teachers unions putting resources behind stuff like that is really what social justice unionism is all about. I've got to say, there've been some people out there. I saw there was an op-ed during the Biden campaign in the Washington Post saying that gun control was bad for working class firearm owners. quite frankly, I don't care. Uh, nobody, if you're hunting and you need more than 4 rounds to shoot a deer, you shouldn't be out shooting.
Well, and I haven't seen that particular op-ed, but I don't get why that would be. I mean, working class voters know how to register a car. They know how to take a driving test. They know how to, do everything else they need to do, fill out a pink slip or whatever when they sell a car. I don't get that it's that onerous for them to go through the process. Am I missing something?
No, I think there's a romanticism among some elements of the left you have these John Brown gun clubs, and you have these, the Socialist Rifle Association.
Right. Redneck Revolt, I think, has some gun clubs too. And
it's ridiculous. It's only reinforcing the role of guns. And furthermore, if any of these people on the left think that guns have ever once helped the left movement, they should really read labor history, because when you bring in guns, that's when movements get crushed. So I think, a combination of factors, there's been an antipathy about gun control in certain parts of the left and the labor left. You have blue collar, white working class folks on one side. You have a handful but vocal minority of sort of, I don't even want to call them leftists, because I don't think you can be a leftist and be anti-gun control. Fantasy role players on the other side, trying to be Saving Private Ryan or some crap like that. And then you have just sort of cautious labor leaders in between. And I think what Weingarten is doing now is very bold. She's teaming up with Moms Demand Action. She's teaming up with Parkland survivors. And they've been doing this work several decades. And it's really been intensified. And I think there's the need for that kind of leadership. And we're certainly seeing it. Look, we saw a couple of weeks ago 200 walkouts of students. A lot of those were teachers. And we're seeing in some places, in Anacostia, for instance, teachers walked out over gun control. In Erie, teachers walked out over gun control. And they said, we're not going to teach in person. We're going to teach online because of safety conditions. They used COVID regulations there, which was really smart to push for that. And I think that's important.
And I think, the business about it is a union issue in terms of workplace safety. I mean, it's a moral issue, but it's also in terms of workplace safety. Randy Weingarten is absolutely right to be focusing on it for her teachers. But you mentioned,
let's look at this homicide. Homicide is I forget the exact number, but it's in the top 3 for workplace deaths in the country.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, it's not just teachers. It's, you mentioned grocery workers. We had the shooting in Buffalo week before last, where we had grocery workers killed. So their unions should all be fighting for it. It's really interesting that it's homicides are number 3 overall. You always hear of workplace shootings in different industries and different businesses, and most of these homicides are guns. Guns are the instrumentation for it. So it makes sense to me. This is a labor issue, right?
It's absolutely a labor issue. And because guns are being used to kill union members so much. And not only that, I mean, if you look, not just the mass shootings, but if you look at the role of gun violence in rural America, it's actually quite interesting. If you look at studies, gun violence is a lot worse in rural America than it is in urban America.
Sure.
And if you look at it in both of those instances, you're seeing how drastically it affects so many people in the labor movement. So for the labor movement to hand out, for a small handful of sort of white working class gun owners, I think is a symptom of the sort of white male-dominated leadership of so many of these unions, and also the fear they have, because look, every union has its reactionaries. The job of a labor leader is to challenge and to educate and to provoke those reactionaries. So just because it's not popular with your union leadership doesn't mean you shouldn't do the right thing.
And it might be time. Well, it is time for them to evolve. I may be wrong about this, Mike, but it seems to me that in the last 10 years, the labor movement has evolved on the climate somewhat. That 10 years ago,
Yeah.
FLCIO, other organizations didn't want to go near it because they had membership who, were hostile to it, and maybe a small handful of them might have their employment affected by it. Seems to me that labor has had to go along in that case with shifting public sentiment, and I hope the same would be true of guns as well.
It was certainly true with guns in this instance. And I think in general, I mean, if you look at the public opinion polling, across spectrum, it's a popular issue. And I think one of the things that gives me hope that this might be different is what Beto is doing in Texas.
Mm-hmm. What is it you like about what he's doing?
Well, look, let's start off. I mean, Beto O'Rourke gets laughed about in the national media a lot because of his presidential campaign and how it, fumbled out. But he ran on a very strong gun control platform. He was criticized for other things. And part of that was shaped by his experience of the El Paso shooting.
Right.
And so after we had the massacre down in Texas recently, what was interesting is that, Beto went to the press conference with Abbott and confronted him and said, "This is on you for making it easier to buy the gun."
Right.
And that provoked a moment. And sometimes movements need leaders, sometimes. And Beto is just down by single digits in Texas. So if Beto's able to run as strong on guns in a place like Texas and win, I think that sends a national message, especially in a hard election year. And I think Abbott is vulnerable. My friend Dave Weigel told me when, about people running for third terms, because there was a mayor running for third terms, it's very hard for any politician to run for a third term. You can't blame the problems on anyone but you if you had 8 years.
That's true. Yeah.
You can't say, we've been working on that for 4 years and we're making progress and we've got to keep making progress and progress is slow. No. When you've been a politician for a decade, you can't blame it on anyone else but yourself.
And so there's been a hell of a lot of problems in Texas. I mean, there's going to be a record hot summer, probably a lot of blackouts. There was the freeze with the power grid failing and millions of people freezing in the dark. There's the shootings, first El Paso, now Uvalde. And it seems to me, Abbott's just got a mess on his hands that he's got to answer for.
He's absolutely got to answer for it. And I think having someone like Beto, who's a national figure, who's going to get momentum, because so often what happens with these gun control, with these mass shootings, is people will be upset for a couple of days. People in the areas close to them, it will sting in their heart forever. I don't think I'll ever forget the scene of watching the SWAT teams retake the Tree of Life as a reporter. It was outside my childhood bus stop. That doesn't go away from me. I still have night terrors where, as a Jew, we're being tracked through the woods by these Nazis, And so, I think people lose sight of that. And so it's important to really have strong asks, because every time we get into these elections, you see people back down on this. And to have someone like Beto, who's popular nationally with donors, certainly.
Right, that's true.
And has a big national name recognition and has 2 million, followers on Twitter. He's able to galvanize and say, here's the ask. We got to defeat the governor of Texas. And I think if he defeated the governor of Texas, that sends a ripple effect to every politician in the country.
Yeah, when Beto ran for president, of course, we mean Beto O'Rourke, I wasn't a big fan because he wasn't progressive enough and because his punk band sucked. But the fact is, for Texas, he might be exactly the right guy to send that message for exactly those reasons.
Yeah.
I don't know about the punk band. Yeah. But the other reasons.
As you said, he's got a little bit of white guy rhythm,
Oh, he definitely does. No question about it. But, journalists are not exempt from this wave of violence, too, whether it's here at home or abroad. We're still talking about in Palestine, Shireen Abu Akleh. We're talking about, you're talking about going to Brazil. There's journalist violence.
Dom Phillips.
Yeah, Dom Phillips, journalist who writes freelance for hopefully I can use the present tense about him, writes freelance for The Guardian. And some other places down there reporting on the big ag, attacks on the forest and the forest peoples there. Hasn't been heard from some time now, right?
Well, I mean, from what we know, from what the Washington Post and the New York Times has reported, there were a series of threats against him and indigenous activist Bruno Pierre. And what was interesting about these threats and other things like that is that it was clear that they were threatened. At one point, they were making stops along the way. They were recording people illegally fishing in this part of the Amazon, and they filmed and took photos of them engaged in illegal fishing, and they were going to report them. And the fishermen came up and pulled a gun on her. And then later, the same fishing crew that they spotted was spotted following them down the river. And nobody can find their boat. Nobody knows where they are. And these are guys with decades of experience in that region. These aren't people that would just get lost.
Right.
And this was a quick trip on a main, tributary there. So these weren't people who, and everybody who's an activist there, they all fear that they've been murdered at this point. I mean, because after 5 days, I think they would have been found at this point.
Yeah, you'd think, wouldn't you? Yeah. Well, it's terrible, but
and it really strikes me close to home. Dom Phillips and I was in Brazil with the BBC many years prior, and then I worked at The Guardian while Dom Phillips was working there. And we had some of the same editors, and we have some of the same mutual friends. And I'm going down to Brazil to cover the election in the fall, and it's a gut check moment. I mean, we're going to have a big election there in the fall, and it's going to be a real gut check moment for me. I want to be there in solidarity. I mean, there's going to be probably a lot of election violence. I think it's important to document that. And, I think, as Jews, we say, may their memories always be a blessing. And I always hope the memory of Dom Phillips is a blessing to anybody taking on this type of fascist gun thuggery. And that's what it is. I mean, you cannot unseparate guns from fascism.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think that, when you think about it from a social point of view, Mike, I feel as if our country, and maybe Brazil's another country too, most places are more civilized than this, but our country anyway, that, we're a combination of like infatuated with guns and post-traumatic about them. And some people have more of the one and more of the other, but it feels like we have a nuts relationship with guns because on the one hand, a lot of people, like you were saying, fetishize them. And on the other hand, I just sent somebody who wrote me a note about it. Give Me Back My Bullets by Leonard Skinner and 38 Special and all these other groups. We sort of romanticize it, we eroticize it, we meaning Americans, right? And yet at the same time, we've been through so much collective trauma, whether it's Newtown, whether it's now Uvalde and Buffalo and Parkland, and all the different shootings we've seen, that I think sometimes even in the same people, you get the both things going on, where people kind of are attracted to guns, but they've been, there's a kind of national PTSD about it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about, because I think people just say, "Oh, this is terrible," but, "Oh, we live in it." It's almost similar to COVID. Like, oh,
right, yeah.
We have twin pandemics. We have gun control. We have COVID. We have certainly a substance abuse crisis in this country.
Yeah.
And most people ignore all three.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you have the economists, Susan Case and Angus Deaton, been writing about the deaths of despair among, I agree with you that we shouldn't single out white working people, but, while Black and brown people have always been dying and struggling economically in excess numbers, now we have also white, blue collar men skyrocketing deaths of despair from suicide, a lot of which includes guns, opioid overdoses, and alcoholism. So we have this kind of, when you overlay that with all the problems other communities have, we're kind of in this national death trip that we don't know how to get out of. And, I don't know, but if you agree with that, any thoughts on how to break that cycle?
I think love, one.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
We need a lot more love. And I think organizing is an expression of love in many ways. I think of Bell Hooks a lot on this, about redefining love, that it's not a state of being, that it's an action. And I think we need a lot more love, a lot more empathy for people. Certainly you're talking about substance abuse there. I mean, that's a hard issue. That's a very stigmatized issue. And I think, it's something that, we have to keep, organizing. And I think so important, what the teachers union is doing now and what Randy Weingarten is doing now, because that is an expression of love. That's an expression of, look, they've had probably over the last decade, dozens of members killed. I don't know the exact number, but, and we have to do something on this.
And even the ones who weren't killed, which of course is the vast majority, there's a trauma of going into work every morning, knowing you're going to be on the front line, literally putting your body on the line against a possibility of shooting. And to me, so that trauma, obviously the greatest tragedy is those who have lost their lives, but the trauma to me extends to pretty much certainly every public school teacher in the country.
Yeah, certainly. So
and I feel like what Randy's doing for the gun epidemic, Sarah Nelson of the Flight Attendants Union has been doing for the COVID epidemic and health in general. You don't think so, huh?
I wouldn't agree with that. She did applaud the lifting of the mask mandate.
She did? I missed that. Okay.
Yeah, I don't agree.
Okay. Well, she may have. No, maybe she didn't, but maybe she applauded the lifting of the mask mandate because her members were getting so much heat for enforcing it.
Still cowardly.
All right. Okay.
I guess Nelson has a lot of gleam to her, but she just endorsed the Spirit Frontier Airlines merger. So, it's easy to be progressive when it's other people's unions.
Right.
I'd like to see her be progressive in her own union. Sorry.
Fair enough.
Union at CWA. She sits on the board of it. They're against net neutrality. I'm not one to paint her as a saint because I just haven't seen it. I haven't seen her. It's really easy to say, hey, we should be doing all this great stuff and then not have your own union do it. So that's sort of how I feel about Sarah Nelson.
Well, I guess she's not coming back on this program. No. But
oh, you tell her you know me. Yeah, get in real trouble. They're nice folks.
Right. But, we do have to think about how unions can lead social struggles more broadly, right? And that's the point I think you've been making today in a lot of different ways. And another way that it occurs to me that they're doing it is in terms of student debt. You have Christopher Smalls of the Amazon Workers Union and some of the Starbucks organizers now pushing, saying Biden should do much more in terms of canceling student debt. And I think to me that was significant for two reasons. One, because it was another example of grassroots union organizers standing up for a social value, a social good. And two, because, people stereotypically think of student debt as being like a white collar kind of elite thing. And here you had, these people saying, no, a lot of people who work at Starbucks, a lot of people who work at Amazon are burdened with student debt. This thing affects everybody and we ought to do something about it. That's my thought. But what do you think about that?
I think, the way you get people involved in the labor movement is you get people involved in social movements. People, when they see social movements, want to get involved themselves, Yeah,
well, I think that's right. what do you think of what's going on with Starbucks right now? Has that momentum continued since the last time you and I talked?
Yeah, I mean, they're organized. I think they're up to like 130 stores successfully unionized, and they're pushing for a national contract. That's going to be a big fight. The CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, is pretty right wing. He's going pretty berserk. He's closing places.
He's closing places that unionize, right? They unionize and then he shuts them down. Yeah,
and they were just denied a key injunction out in Arizona, and so I think it's moving. The one thing, I saw this was on CNBC. More Perfect Union did a video about this. Their stocks have gone down dramatically through the union organizing. They've gone down something like 30% because, this affects their brand. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I think at a certain point, you're going to have a nationwide Starbucks strike where maybe it starts with a couple hundred stores. But I mean, it's been scattered a store here and there, but the company, I'm seeing reports and reading them and hearing them anecdotally of people being dissuaded from union organizing because they don't want to lose their health insurance.
Right.
And that's yet another reason why employer-based health insurance is so bad, because it restricts people's freedom to talk on the job. Somebody fears, I might die. So.
Right. No, absolutely. It's the biggest leverage anybody has. So before I let you go, Mike, what stories on the labor front are you going to be following in the next few weeks? What stories should we all be following?
Well, I have a big story coming out in the next week or two of Capital Maine on the national parks, following up on what we talked about. I have a big story coming out. I met these at my birthday at PNC Park. I met these Franciscan friars that were touring every ballpark in America, talking to people dressed as Franciscan friars. So
why?
They were talking about social justice and other things like that. They were young guys too.
Did they have like the bowl haircuts and everything?
No, they didn't have the bowl haircuts, but they had the robe and that whole. So, we'll see where it goes. We have a lot of interesting stuff coming out. The AFL-CIO conventions this week. It's going to be pretty boring, in my opinion. So, that's where we're at.
I think I went to one of those conventions, and it was okay. I won't say it rocked my world, but it was worth covering. All right. Well, listen. Good luck to you. Sounds like it's quieted down there in Squirrel Hill a little bit. So
a little bit for now.
Yeah. So maybe you'll be able to concentrate on whatever it is you've been doing. But as always, first of all, check out the Payday Report. Payday Report.
Subscribe. We rely on donations, so subscribe. Click.
Yeah. And the website?
PaydayReport.com.
That's what I thought. And Mike Alke, LK, is the publisher and editor and a great labor reporter. So as always, Mike, thanks for the great work. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Well, thanks for having me on, Richard.
You bet. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.